Hey, this is Trav here, and this podcast relies on the good people who help support this podcast on Patreon, and I'd like to give a big thank you to Bill, Bree, Brendan, Grant, Lisa, Mog, Dan, and Paula. Thank you so much, and here's the show. Hey, welcome to episode 174, Tales from the Mind Boat, this slow-moving boat ride and personal journal of one Trav Nash, which is me speaking. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast, I really do appreciate it. And today's show is all about the thumping, banging, and aggressive sounds from downstairs, and how it pretty much perpetuates a life of fear, and how it affects me, and possibly reflects the world around us. So it's a good show, and all you need to do is sit back, relax, think about what you're going to do next as we set sail. A thunderous, loud thud makes the walls shake from downstairs. This guy who's been living there is having some kind of episode where he has this unquenchable desire to punch and break things until he eventually emotionally and physically exhausts himself. The next day, the nature strip is a graveyard of his destruction. Discarded broken plastic white goods and a demolished sofa. People of vans and trailers slow down as they pass by, and assess if there's anything worth their time picking up any of these ghosts of the modern living and comfort. I'm still up, and it's well past midnight. I can't sleep, and this banging is not helping. I just sit swallowed in a couch, tapping at my phone and looking up occasionally, watching some random Let's Play video on YouTube. The video is of this guy playing some simulation game, and is doing everything he can to make the citizens as miserable and prone to mass riots as he can. And the result of this is a city where capitalism keeps moving in with new businesses and a never-ending revenue to sustain it. He chuckles like a very pleased of herself cartoon witch in this tone of amazement, but at the same time, nobody's really that surprised, and this is the only way to play the game if you ever want to make money. And it's always at the cost of other people's happiness. Another dull thud hits the wall below, and the vibration rides up and expands underneath the floorboards below. My cat that was asleep next to me on a pillow suddenly springs to attention and looks at that door, and then back at me, as if I can give an explanation as to why we live in some kind of suburban war zone. At some point the internet dropped out, and the YouTube video I was watching froze on the screen, only displaying some kind of spinning circle that keeps rotating as it desperately tries to reconnect again. The room fell silent in this unnerving stillness that begins to swallow the room. Suddenly the smallest of sounds become the most audible. The whirling of the fridge, the rustling of the trees outside the window in the winter sea breeze, the low hum of the PlayStation as it tries to cool down its complex components from overheating, or the occasional sound of a single car gliding from left to right and then evaporating into silence again. Only this silence can be shattered by another loud thump against the wall, or what sounds like marbles dropping onto a hard wooden floor. My heart speeds up and tries to slow down in a confused state of how exactly I should react to the current situation. All I can do really is sink lower in the seat and wait for the spinning circle to reconnect to the internet again and drown out all this terrible silence and thumping of sounds. The fridge splutters and strains to keep that soft linear hum, then manages to find its slow tempo again, just in time for the video to begin playing, and another car glides by behind me, up a road towards somewhere where the downstairs is less noisy. The large tree outside scratches its leaf-stripped branches across the window awning, which makes a light scratching sound, until there's the inedible sound of snapping against the strain, and the plummeting of twigs drop down to a concrete driveway below. The irregular speed of my heart accelerates and puts on its handbrake. It goes drifting from left to right, trying to straighten itself again, causing me to become lightheaded and vanish into a red dust cloud of panic. The unknown is a vacant warehouse of too many possibilities, and all of them are dangerous and end terribly. The hostile nature of erratic sounds from downstairs have no mute button. There is no reason for it, and therefore it can't be reasoned with. The sounds are made by a troubled man who replicates the internal noise inside his head, and inflicts it on anyone who lives anywhere near this apartment. I can no longer hear anything in the room, and my hearing becomes fine-tuned to the sound from downstairs. Chairs that scrape across the kitchen floor, the creak of the front door, and the unlocking of the gate to the apartment, only to have that gate smashed into itself, and his front door slammed shut again. The noise is no longer an occasional thing, a sound that only happens now and then. Now it's driven by something wild and unpredictable. It causes my heart to send tremors that rise up my chest and vibrate down my arms, causing my hands to turn white and tremble, until I pull my sleeves down over them and try to plant my feet into the carpet and ground myself before the fear takes full control. Another loud thump comes from the wall, and it feels like the apartment shakes. Or maybe it's the fact that all balance has been robbed from me as I sway from side to side and try and convince myself that I'm safe and I'm home and the door is locked and I should be secure. But honestly, who knows? The kind of person who can break furniture and punch walls at 1 a.m. in the morning is not the kind of person you want to be stuck in a building that has a security fence and locks us all in with him. The destructive nature and the unpredictability is what really worries me. The times I've spoken to him, when he works himself into this state, he sounds completely removed from reality and seems to believe that people are talking about him, and he challenges these invisible enemies to try their best to take him out. All I can think now are the terrible what ifs. What if he puts a hole through the wall and tries to attack the woman next door? What if he comes upstairs again and bangs on our door? What if he holds us all hostage, believing we are his enemies and won't let us leave? What if he starts a fire of all this broken furniture and we don't have any time to escape? The what ifs are possibly even worse than I can even conjure in my head. The gate crashes in again and the metal bars vibrate, causing the poles to give off a metallic ring as the sound rides up towards the dark, overcast, moonless sky. Light rain begins to fall, as if the sky can't handle the violence anymore, and a ghostly moan bounces off the walls downstairs. Raindrops tap the living room window and streak down the glass, carrying clusters of dirt as it smears its way down. The sound is almost calming, and in direct contrast to the passive-aggressive pacing that can be heard downstairs. Imagine some caged lion patrolling around its cage, planning its escape, and who it would have to pounce on and subdue to take its freedom back and return to the wild jungle from which it was born. A muffled drumbeat loudly pulsates through the floor, and the volume slides down again, but the early morning stillness is too quiet not to hear the early 80s Australian pub rock that cuts in and out in between the sound of raindrops and the rustling of naked trees between our apartments. The front door slams shut and screeches open again. The gate whines as it's opened and pulled in so hard, the sound itself causes a ripple of sound and fury that could possibly give birth to tiny, violent tornadoes in the right conditions. I wear myself down in a panic and dread. I drown in terrible thoughts of possibilities and those worst-case scenarios. I should just go to bed and pull the covers over my head and try to sleep the night away and wait for it to blow over. But it never really does, because it's every day, it's every night. It's a problem that has no solution. It's an issue that nobody wants to deal with. The only way to deal with it is to not deal with it, seems to be their approach. Until we are directly threatened or our lives are at risk, there is nothing anybody can do about it. I fear that if it ever escalated to that level, then it would be far too late. There is no reasonable explanation for anything sane about the behaviour, and we all have to live and bear it. All of us in this tiny little shoebox of apartment trying to get on with our lives and not make anyone else's life harder than it already is. But this guy seems to get away with it. There is absolutely no consequences for his actions. There is no repercussions for not getting along with others or respecting the lives of those around him. He lacks any kind of rational thought, seems unhinged, not aware of himself or the place in the world around him. And surely this is the most dangerous of facts. Someone who can get away with making someone else's life so miserable will only keep doing it and will keep pushing it until it becomes far too deadly. There is no place for these types of people to go. There is no budget or plan to fix this kind of problem. All they can do is keep dropping their troubled minds in amongst society and hope they won't cause any harm to themselves or others. If they do, they just get plucked out of obscurity and shoved back into another apartment again, with another group of people who just want to be left alone and live in some kind of peace and quiet. Maybe things are so normal now that it's no longer a pressing issue. If you rent an apartment, it's almost an unspoken fact that someone in the building is going to be emotionally or mentally unstable and lives to make everyone else's lives as troubled as their lives seem to be. I can always remember being told that you have to grin and bear it. There's always going to be people like this, and I'm not sure when we all agreed that we should just all tolerate it. Whether it was a school bully who verbally beat me down daily, or some kind of passive-aggressive manager at a place I worked at, there seems to be no end of people who live to annoy others, and it's so frequent now it's just part of life. Anytime there's a group of more than one, it's not uncommon for someone within that group will be the person who has to ruin it for everybody else. An outward display of chaos and confrontation, and they seem to feed off of the trouble that they cause. The kind of person who is frightened by quiet, peaceful places, and needs to come in of guns drawn, loud drums and a megaphone to make their lives and presence seem to be known. Some kind of validation that is undeserved. Kind of people who don't seem to care if anyone is annoyed or hurt by their overly aggressive and disruptive nature. Any kind of attention is what drives them, gives them significance, and gives their horrible lives meaning. Even when they're gifted with a low-rent, fully furnished commission housing, there is something broken inside of them that needs to lash out against the goodwill of others, turn their lives into hard rubbish and self-generated pity. The kinds of minds that don't really deserve to be shoved around into empty boxes, like it's no kind of problem. They need to be properly assessed, and a plan needs to be put into place to give these kinds of people a solid foundation to start again from. Leaving them alone to fend for themselves only makes a troubled mind have too much time to suffocate from not enough social interaction, and this will manifest into what is happening right now. A daily physical assault on peace and quiet, a coordinated attack on people's right to come home and be left alone, to have somewhere safe and give us all a break from the worst versions of the human race, and just be surrounded by our self-picked friends, family and loved ones that we're lucky enough to have around us still. But these basic human rights of an average person is of no concern to anyone who has the power to make this society run any smoother, because there is no profit from a world that is not constantly bombarded with fear and uncertainty for a future that none of us can really foresee. The walls around us need to be smashed in, and dangerous people need to live just below us to remind us that we are never safe. Safety is an illusion. Few people have the intelligence and have developed enough empathy to know when they are hurting those around them, and will never stop and evaluate an alternative way to live. I personally wasn't built to survive in such a world, and at any given time it feels like my heart is pushing into overdrive. My chest hurts, and it feels like it's scraping and cutting up against my rib cage. My mind is exhausted of all the energy it burns trying to plan escape routes to save my life if anything goes wrong. There is little energy for anything else, it seems. a constant straight line of fear and instability, a future that cannot stop to fix the crumbling infrastructure it was built upon. It's not a city for the weak and worried, it's for those who can switch off and keep running forward at full speed into uncertain dangers and miraculously survive near misses of oncoming brushes of death and serious emotional and physical injuries. This home is not a home but a cage. It's an illusion of a sanctuary from the dangerous minds that are outside. The mad have moved in and living right underneath my feet. The walls are crumbling and the floor is all ready to swallow itself and everything in the room with us. The seasons may change and the grey clouds might move on and let the sun come out again, but poisoned minds just become more and more mad and unpredictable. There is no accurate weather report or scientific data that can predict what the next aftershock will hit. All we know is that it's coming, but we can't prepare ourselves for something that is even worse than we can ever imagine. Our minds are programmed to find patterns and gain understanding and comprehension from information by sorting out all the finer details into something we can grasp and try to work with. But there are still some things that we can never understand, as there is no explanation. When something is this broken, the programming becomes corrupted and the wiring is tangled and begins to spark. And it's all the warning signs that we all saw, but nobody did anything until the walls were pushed out and the ceiling fell into the floor again. Suddenly the safety of the home was exposed to the elements, and the dangerous people who we try to put out of our heads that we've always known existed have always been the real predators that make our lives as hard as possible, and now we've been fed to the lions and the hungry wolves. Those who refuse to be domesticated, those that need to be wild and free to hunt the prey of the weaker and lame species who just want to drink by the waterhole. We're told not to make judgment or intervene, because we seem to be in agreement that this is how everything's supposed to be, the way of nature, this unspoken hierarchy. We know deep down that it will eventually eat itself from the outside in, and there will be no safe places to hide, and these people won't stop until they destroy us all, and eventually themselves along with it. So that's it for another week. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. I just had to try and deal with the fear and loathing that's been festering inside of me the last couple of days and how it's affecting my sleep cycles. So hopefully it makes sense. And if you like this episode, then you'll probably like this whole show. There's over 150 episodes now, completely free, ready to stream and download at your leisure. You can subscribe on the very app you're using right now to keep you up to date when a new episode drops. And also leaving a review on whatever application you're using would really help this podcast become more visible. If you got a couple of minutes free to write it, I'd really deeply appreciate it. Failing that, just sharing it on Facebook and Twitter or whatever social media you're using, telling people to their face would really help me out, and I would deeply appreciate it. You can follow the podcast on Twitter and Facebook just by searching for Tales from the Mindboat Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Nashtopia, or you can see my art diary on Instagram at Trav Nash Draws Things. The music for this podcast is composed by Tim Witt. You can listen to his music right now just by searching for Tim Witt Sounds on SoundCloud. You can also find his albums and Pay What You Feel on Bandcamp, and I highly recommend that you do. This episode was written, read, edited, copied and pasted by me, Trav Nash, and you're welcome. So that's it for another week. Thanks again for listening. I really do appreciate it. I hope you have a good week. You're doing well. Look after yourself. Until next week, stay safe. And as always, peace. Peace.